We're 5 minutes in. Let's get this panel going on. It was a very lighthearted conversation early on, and that's basically what you can expect from this panel moving forward. We have two then special guest panelists. We have Amanda Natividad. Amanda is currently the marketing architect for the audience research startup SparkToro. She's also a contributor for Adweek and a Le Cordon Bleu trained chef and a former journalist. Amanda previously led marketing for Growth Machine, led marketing for Liftopia, built Fitbit's B2B content program, and led content and comms for NatureBox. We also have Stephen Ganczaruk, my apologies. Stephen is the SEO manager at Yelp for Business. He has more than 10 years of SEO, content marketing, and web analytics experience. Formerly, Stephen held positions of global SEO manager at digital media at Adobe, and he also led organic search strategy for Creative Cloud, including Photoshop, Illustrator, and more. And he was in the past also the SEO manager at the University of Phoenix. Today, then, we have just a high-level conversation about marketing trends and content SEO, all of this. We want to keep it pretty much just whatever kind of comes into our minds. I have some starter questions to get us kicked off. And I would say that let's start with, well, where do you see the future of SEO and content marketing heading? And what are some of the recent shifts that you've observed happen with just those specific two channels?
You want to take that one first, Amanda?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, so I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and especially with, so I think about content in terms of some of the main organic distribution channels, which to me are, Google or, search engines and social media. And I think what we're seeing, especially over the past year, is people or marketers becoming more aware of the fact that these platforms reward zero-click behavior. So the things like people trying to optimize for Google's search engine results page, and then even things like people trying to repurpose content that is native to the social media platform. Like we're seeing a lot more people produce threads on Twitter versus simply linking out to their blog post, which is, very normal behavior that we used to do, right? And sometimes we still do, right? But I think marketers are becoming more aware about the need to repurpose for that given platform. Just like on LinkedIn, we're seeing more people create more of those sort of like kind of mini blog posts, I'll call them, but they're just status updates. But it's where people are writing in like 70 words or so what their update would be, and then putting their link in the comments instead of in the post itself. Like, I think we're just seeing more and more marketers becoming savvier about this. And I think that's going to be what it takes to win ultimately. Like being aware that your users or that your readers or your audience doesn't want to leave the platform they're on, and then trying to figure out how to give them value in that platform with the hopes that they will eventually come to your website or your blog or your newsletter over time.
Yeah, I mean, those are interesting points, and I've been thinking about just even on the organic search channel, if you will, because although I work with a lot of different teams, like that is the primary channel that I'm focused on. And what I've kind of seen is just the competitiveness in long tail keywords. And I think that why this is so is because a lot of content marketers and SEO professionals are starting to are not caring as much about pure keyword volume for their phrases. They're caring about what drives traffic, what drives conversions, touch points, however you want to call it. And they're really dialed in on what is driving success for their business, or what is the measurement of success. And instead of just focusing on the high keyword volume phrases, they're refocusing on what is meaningful, what's driving impact. And then from that point, when you think about what that audience is, when you're creating content for that audience, then you can market you can try to explore different channels that are related to that specific market that you're trying to reach. And I think that's what the shift is. Instead of just saying, we're going to try to go for the largest audience, you're saying, I don't even care about that largest audience first. I just want to go for this specific one. I'm going to ignore some of this noise or ignore some of the traditional factors of success because I only care about my specific success for this campaign.
Yeah, I think those are both like really excellent points. I think that in the past, you might have seen somebody create a blog post on their website and share that blog post on LinkedIn and expect that blog post to rank and email somebody or your list, if you will, that blog post and expect everybody to just consume that one piece of content and serve a multi-channel sort of approach. But I think that we're now seeing this idea that, okay, content that gets produced for search is serving a completely different idea or kind of relevance than, say, somebody who is just simply posting on LinkedIn or Twitter. And I think that that's a pretty important dichotomy to recognize. I remember working with just countless Clearscope customers where they'll come in and be like, well, we want this thought leadership post to rank well, and we're going to use it for our email and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, like you can't just take content and expect it to do well across all of the different channels. The landscapes are changing. And I like what you were saying, Amanda, about how it's almost like where everybody's a little bit more ADD or something, right? Where it's just like, oh, well, I don't want to read a blog post if I'm on Twitter. I just want like a sentence or two on what's happening, or perhaps a thread. And I think that right when people perform searches, they kind of are looking for a blog post to a certain degree, but more importantly, they're looking for a specific answer to their question, which is why we're seeing then this like long tail approach being way more powerful, because Google has also gotten a lot better at understanding that that piece of content is doing a good job, like serving the user needs.
Yeah. I would also add to that, that made me remember, this webinar that Bernard, you and I had earlier this year, which was about the future of SEO and how you see the future of SEO being in perspective-based content. So more understanding how something is versus what something is. And that really stuck with me. And I think that dovetails really nicely with where we are with SEO and with content in general today, where, if someone's searching like, like things like conversions from milliliters to ounces, like, yeah, you don't need a blog post to read about that. You just kind of need the answer, right? Maybe you need a calculator, right? But like maybe what you're curious about is the experience of somebody who drank a bunch of coffee in the middle of the day and how it affected their sleep. Like you might be curious about that. So I mean, just kind of bring that up here to point out like where we are with content in general, where I feel like marketers, creators will need to be savvier about how they approach topics versus just simply explaining what a topic or what a subject is.
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess then to follow up on this idea, right? Because what a lot of us are talking about is foregoing the classical ways that people have been approaching both SEO and content, saying, oh, keyword search volume, no. Saying, oh, instead of posting something on LinkedIn that links out to the blog or something on Twitter, like, let's just keep it on LinkedIn or Twitter. And this becomes then, I would say, a lot harder to measure in terms of, well, is this actually, is what I'm doing actually valuable? So a couple of questions from both to both of you, specifically since you work in-house. How do you pitch your leadership team or your boss on the idea that we should be designing a blog post that talks about a perspective that somebody could have within the topic that you care about, or that, you know, Amanda is going to just focus a lot of time making Twitter threads and retweeting things. And a lot of that is not value capture in a measurable manner, but it's something that we feel like we should do. How do you get leadership and just internal buy-in, especially when a lot of these concepts are more ethereal in terms of their abilities to succeed or be measured?
All right, well, that's a pretty meaty question there. So we'll try to dive into a little bit of that. So I think a couple of things came to mind that I was thinking about, and when you mentioned that question. And first of all, like what I kind of started with too was like understanding what your gauge for success is. So explaining like what's your measurement of success, what is your KPIs, what is the goal of this specific campaign. And so not every campaign is going to be revenue driven. It's going to be awareness. It's going to be it's going to be to improve your EAT score. It's going to be to improve your quality of the domain. It's just things to like you have to kind of filter out in segments like what's the goal of that specific campaign. The layer on top of that too that I sometimes think about from a content perspective, after I've also thought about this, is what reactive versus proactive. So you might have a certain campaigns that you have set up for like, hey, I want to go after these phrases, or I want to go after like this specific segments. So I'm going to be creating content for those for this specific market, because I think I view this as an opportunity. And as the SEO professional, I want to go after those. And then that may not be on, that content may not be on a product roadmap, or doesn't sync with PMMs, doesn't sync with like the expectations of the broader organization that you work for or your client. But you can view that as like, this is important to the overall, you have to kind of show that this is important to the overall campaign as a whole. And then the reactive part is saying, okay, well, we have this new product launch coming up, and we need to drum up some awareness for this, or we need to get more people to purchase this product or the service. Great, like that's the reactive part. That's the like doing the kind of keyword research. That's the more traditional, if you will. But all of that overlaps for sure. And so I think that like you have to kind of piece all of this together and say, what is that whole journey from awareness to purchase? And if you don't have that, if you don't have all those touch points clearly defined, you can do that with content. You can do that with just piecing it together with keyword research, looking at search results, and understanding what that journey is, and kind of putting in those different pieces of content and those different touch points for conversions. And usually that kind of lines up. The further you get away is usually more proactive SEO, more proactive content, and you're closer to the conversion part is more reactive. It's like, well, we've created this product, we've already identified as a need, we want to sell it and get people to convert on it. So that's that whole kind of line there that I see. I think that's one part of your question. We can riff off of that, but I'd like to hear some more thoughts so that I can kind of react to that, if you will.
Well, so I actually have two answers to this. My first answer will be what I did before, or like how I have experienced this in the past. So during my time over at Fitbit B2B, and Fitbit B2B means, or at the time it meant selling devices or fitness trackers in bulk and custom reporting software to other employers so that they could run corporate wellness programs for their employees. So like if your boss bought your whole team a bunch of Fitbits and you all did step challenges together, that would be Fitbit B2B basically. And so when I was there, I mean, Fitbit was already a known and beloved consumer brand. We were getting a ton of inbound requests for the B2B side. So at the time, we didn't really have an SEO need, as in we didn't have the need to be like, hey, we need to grow organic traffic to this site so that we can attract more people. It was, we need to create a bunch of educational content to educate this existing demand. And so at the time, you know, a lot of our target audience of HR and business and wellness professionals, they tended to prefer basically PDF content, where it tended to be a lot of one-to-one conversations and a lot of like, hey, can you send me these assets in an email? So it became very natural to create white papers and ebooks and a lot of gated content, which, right, is one way of going about content marketing, but that was what worked at the time for us. And it wasn't until a couple of years into my role there that we launched a blog. And then by then we already had so much content anyway that it was like, cool, we'll just repurpose all this stuff. And it was really easy and really fast to create a bunch of this content or publish a bunch of this blog content. So we saw pretty early that the need was education and there was existing demand. And so for us, the content need was really like, it really was more in that realm of why and how are we doing this versus what the thing is. So we already had that sort of executive buy-in, at least to some degree, of, hey, we really need to establish ourselves as true thought leaders. So our main focus is not what is corporate wellness, it's how are we driving meaningful outcomes? How are we showing the return on investment when you are, when you're buying like 500 Fitbits, like what is that? What does that ROI look like for you? So we knew pretty early on that we had to do it. So then the case became like, all right, we got to invest in some really good case studies. We should work with some third-party sort of analytics firms to help us be able to tell the story in a way that isn't so overtly Fitbit is the best. So we kind of knew that. And then where we are, or where I am today with content, so I'm at SparkToro now, the audience research startup, where we create tools that help people discover their audience's sources of influence. So the things like where your audience, what websites your audience frequents, what social accounts they follow, what podcasts they listen to, and what they discuss publicly online. And this company was co-founded by Rand Fishkin, who is a founder of Moz and was, I think, the first person to codify SEO best practices. So theoretically, it would make sense that we would take a very SEO focused approach to content, but we don't. We take I would say that we take a very community-led approach, sort of product-led approach to our content. And if anything, it's more like Rand-led marketing, where we have a lot of people who have been following Rand's career and what Rand has been doing, and they've been like our initial pool of customer advocates. So the way we are approaching content now is really just trying to educate our users, help people do better marketing, or help people make more informed decisions about their marketing strategy, and then hopefully SparkToro can become a part of that. And the other piece is, we very much talk about audience research, but there isn't really demand for that keyword. Like when I've looked up like, oh, like, is this a high volume keyword? It's not. I think there are like 10 searches a month on audience research. So in a sense, it's like, is there an SEO focused strategy to be had for us? Maybe not. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I like exactly what the both of you have brought up, which is why I asked this question to begin with. I feel like we are echoing a lot of the same sentiments that have been occurring with content and SEO in general. And to a certain degree, I think a lot of that could be summed up with this idea of trust, right? There's so much content and so much noise and just so much stuff being shoved into everybody's faces everywhere you go, especially on the internet. And I think what at least the last couple of years have demonstrated, where now we spend even more time in front of our screens doing work or pleasure, that you just get inundated with so much stuff. And I think we're seeing a lot of people have screen fatigue or shill for promotion fatigue, ad fatigue that's associated with what's happening. So I think kind of you're more, to Stephen's point, right? Your more reactive approach that just kind of covers all of the common bases that you would cover, like what is blah, how to do blah, is not that compelling anymore to a lot of new users or just people on the internet that are browsing for information. So as a result, we're kind of seeing people tune that out and look for a more proactive approach, which is again why these like long tail, the rise of SEO in a long tail sense has become so prominent, right? Because now we're just saying, look, when somebody searches for topic X, like we only really care about perhaps this sliver of stuff, then let's just service that sliver of stuff. And that's good SEO. For the rest of it, let's produce interesting, thought-provoking content. And I think that that is more difficult to convince, I would say, you know, if you're an agency, your clients, or if you're working in-house, your boss, because you might just say, hey, look, we should have a series of content about, you know, say for Yelp for Business, I could envision, it's like, oh, like, you know, mom and pop shop uses Yelp for Business and gets like this amount of success. And it's more of like a story-driven narrative. And somebody might look at that and be like, well, how do we know that that's working? And then you know, you'd have to like shrug your shoulders and be like, well, just believe. I have conviction that it's going to work. And so I think there's certainly friction and tension involved with that, right? Because you're kind of taking a swing for the fences and saying, yes, like I see a world in the future where this is gonna be good, and I'm not sure how to back that up. So I do want to ask that, is like, how do you back that up? And then just to like follow up on Amanda's deal, I would love to talk about this new world of influencer marketing and community-driven marketing as well. I think that for a lot of us, right, where we are SEO or content marketer or just marketers in general, it's like, you know, what's old is new and what's new is old. And obviously things constantly flip-flop back and forth depending on where everyone's attention is. But I feel like we are entering this era of, okay, I don't trust anything on the internet anymore. I don't go to wired.com or techcrunch.com just to read what's happening anymore. I read what gets texted to me in my iMessage from my marketing friend, or I read, right, what's happening in this private forum or Slack community that I have opted I participate in. And I will read the individual article or whatever that's being shared there. So I do think that that has to then start to play a role in how we think about both SEO and content and distribution, right? It's sort of like this shifting landscape. But all right, before we do that, I do want to go, okay, how do you pitch something that kind of feels far out when you can't say, yes, right, there's monthly search volume associated with this. Yes, you know, we should do it. Like, where does that come from? Stephen, any thoughts there?
I was kind of interested in kind of answering some of your first parts about content and trust, you know, or like,
yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yes, please do that.
You know, the thing that popped in my head was like just authenticity, like proving trust through authenticity. And I think that, you know, that there are ways to do that with using the resources you have at hand and trying to amplify who unique parts of like your community, and trying to reach out to some of those people who may be naturally influencer marketing, if you will, or maybe naturally just talking about your about your products and services, and you can use that, like get permission to use some of those some of what they're saying, or have that person kind of give a more direct quote or video or whatnot. You know, we've tried that. We've been working on this, and it's something that's important to me too, is to show uniqueness through authenticity. And I know I've been very keen on adding small business owner quotes to reinforce some of the content that we've been writing. We have a behind the review podcast that kind of talks to small business owners directly to talk to just understand what challenges they have, what's been, what's it like being a small business owner. And on the restaurant side, we have a couple of podcasts as well too, that show that authenticity. So it's like that. It's not always hearing from people internally, that's from the brand or from the business, that it's like initiating that conversation and doing the listening and being authentic and bringing people on who can share a interesting voice to showcase, to just talk about the topics of interest. And it resonates a lot better. And it's just true. It works because there's trust, it's real, it's authentic. And on a side note, we can maybe talk about this a little bit more, is just that Google is recognizing a lot of this from an SEO point of view. Like things like passage rank, for example, which is just pulling out chunks of content that maybe don't directly answer that question from a pure SEO keyword point of view. But Google has said, like, this is really relevant, this is important. They've been able to kind of process that language, that text, to promote it into the search results as a featured snippet. So that's what I was thinking about. And then in terms of like the influencer marketing and whatnot, I can send that back to you to kind of talk about it a bit more. But I think that the more authentic you are, you build that trust, and then all of that conversation becomes a lot more natural.
Yeah. I think that why not call it like internet landfill of content, but okay, internet landfill of content, you heard it from me, we all come, for the most part, from the SEO content marketing background. And, there's this long running joke in internet marketing. It's like, oh, well, the best products are the ones that pay the best affiliate fees, right? You go through the list, it's like, 10 best blah. It's like rank number 1. It's like, check out this deal. And then you click on it. Of course, you check the referral parameters. Like, yeah, question mark referral equals Bernard. Of course, makes me trust it a lot less. So I think there's that. And then, right, from a pure like internet marketing standpoint as well, right? You just see these long listicles or whatever, so pros, cons, and then it's like a stock photo of the product that's being recommended, if it's a physical product, or a stock screenshot that you got from the homepage of the like software product that you're reviewing. And you just like, how can I trust this, right? So I feel like users are becoming much more wary of like SEO content, if you will. And as a result, I do think that Google is specifically fighting exactly that, right? They're training their algorithm using manual reviewers that are going through and like marking what a page that looks authentic should look like, and then trying to get their algorithm to promote more of those pages onto the front spots for Google. I do vividly recollect having coffee with Nat Eliason, the founder of Growth Machine. And he kind of told me in a jaded sort of sense, he was like, yeah, I don't really start my research process often with Google anymore. I just prefer to go to Reddit or Quora, not probably Quora. Quora seems kind of janky these days, but Reddit, for example, and I start my research there. And it's this nod, I think, that yes, a lot of the content out there doesn't feel that authentic and doesn't feel that trustworthy. So that's, I think, a good segue into community-driven marketing and influencer-led marketing. I mean, Amanda, you're knees deep in this specific field. Like, what's going on? What should everybody know about this new channel on influencer and community-led marketing? I would love to hear and pick your brain on how we can like take advantage of this new shift moving forward.
Yeah. What really stuck with me with what you've said is what's new is old and what's old is new. I tweeted like the other week, something like community-led growth is the new product-led growth. And a couple of my friends were like, yeah, what's really interesting is people have been doing community forever, but other people are talking about how this is so new. And it's so true, right? Like there are, and I asked for a couple of examples because I thought it was really interesting. I was, and not in a, I doubt this way, but in a, I can't think of any off the top of my head way. And they pointed out like car manufacturers and like, or transportation. Like they pointed out, like Harley Davidson they've had communities or local communities for forever. A lot of other luxury car companies will have like local chapters, and that's sort of a driver of growth. And I think that's super interesting because that's such an old or classic industry to cite. And it's absolutely true. Like you have, when you have these really happy customers, they kind of want to hang out with each other and learn from each other. And then people who are not the customers kind of see that and they go, I want to be in that club, or like I want to be in that group. Like that's cool. So I think what's interesting with community now is for a long time, some of the most successful communities have thrived on exclusivity. So like these luxury car companies where it's like, oh, like where people are like, I want to be part of that club. I think there is still some of that, right? I think we all know as marketers that you can tap into FOMO or like exclusivity to get people to talk about your product more. But I think where we are with communities specifically, it's become more like, hey, exclusivity is out. Like if you want in, like you're in. And I think we're seeing more people do sort of open door communities. And we're seeing this a lot with crypto, right? Where, I mean, yeah, you could definitely argue that it's the barriers to entry are high and that it might be hard to learn, but it's open to everybody who wants to join. And that's the whole core of it, like with NFTs and like Ethereum, like these things that are like, yeah, they're hard to learn, but if you want to learn it, there are a lot of people who will welcome you with open arms and talk about it. So I kind of just feel like that's where we are with the community, where people are recognizing that they need to be very open. People want to be open. People are valuing accessibility and inclusivity in a way that we haven't really seen before. So that's kind of me riffing on community.
Yes, then I have some skepticism about some of like trending, like those kind of trending topics, like where like crypto and NFTs, and then these, what is it, the landfill of content, Bernard, is that what you said? Those kind of sites start popping up, but they come up so fast and they just like a deluge of content. And then all of a sudden, because there's so much content they've published, they become trustworthy all of a sudden because they were there first to kind of claim that space. So I think that I want to see more. Like, I'm hoping that there are more sites who take a little bit a better approach to this in the future, where like even though you're not first, that you can still win, if you will, win, meaning to be at the top of the search results, to be driving traffic, but also being like the best, and best meaning the best content, the most thoughtful, the most interesting, and I hope those are the sites that get rewarded.
Yeah,
I hope so too. Yeah, I hope so too. But I don't know. I don't know if I would even say cautiously optimistic, but I would say I think what's unique about some of these new industries like crypto is we're seeing more people build their audiences on public social media, where I feel like that tends to be a little bit more of a meritocracy than simply being first to talk about something. Where I feel like on something like on a platform like Twitter, if you're trying to be an expert on we can just use a different example, like on supply chain and like the whole supply chain problem. If you're wrong about something, or if you're not trustworthy, people will call you out immediately, or like it'll be, or maybe you won't be called out, but your content won't get traction because people will know you don't know what you're talking about. So I would like to believe that on public social media, for some industries or for some topics, that if you know what you're talking about, you'll get rewarded. But then that also calls into question, like, that is a rented audience, right? And I feel like what we need to do as creators, marketers, people who want to build brands, is to be very aware that on social media, you're only renting the audience, you're renting the space, and you still need to figure out how you can own your audience. So that, and maybe a traditional blog is not always the way to go anymore. Maybe you can own your audience in a webinar series, right? Like digital events, or it becomes a newsletter, or there's still the blog. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was getting at too, is that that sometimes it's like you do want to bring back your audience and control the platform a little bit more. You know, and like in another, like, because sometimes the other platforms can change their rules. I know that like Twitch has gone through a lot of like just policy changes amongst other sites too, but that was one that pops to mind. And it's like you just have a little bit more control, if you will, of that. But at the same time, it's like you still can promote like different asset types. It doesn't always have to be like a blog. It can still be a video, but maybe you're publishing it in multiple locations. So like you're still reaching that audience who's not quite ready to jump over or like sign up for your newsletter or whatnot, but probably should, because you can get that content a lot faster, and you know, maybe even faster or earlier. But I think that's this kind of what I kind of was thinking about too, is that bringing that audience back to, even if you do build it somewhere else. It just kind of depends like what your growth is, like what you're trying to do. You're totally satisfied with just, you know, of in one location of just publishing YouTube videos, and that's great, and that's all you want to do. But you know, for a lot of us who are working for bigger brands, looking for clients who are looking at growth, like you need to bring them back to your site at some point to convert the users, or just control that conversation a bit more, make it more engaged on your own platform.
Yeah, there's so many interesting facets about everything that y'all had just said here, right? At some point, you don't want all of your eggs in one basket, right? If you run a very successful YouTube channel, you don't own it, right? Like you're renting YouTube's software and database and audience. And should one day YouTube just believe that you violated some term or policy, we've seen, right, the outrage of like content creators lose their livelihoods literally overnight, right? And I think, you know, some protests and deaths even were a result of said things. And I would say in the same way, for search engine optimization, what we're seeing is that Google's like eating everybody's pie, right? They're like saying, oh, yeah, well, we'll answer that. Oh, you want the best hotel, but you can just book them on Google itself, right? So I'd say, you know, one core theme that I've taken away from this is that, yeah, diversification, I think, is good once you get big enough. I do think that when you're small and you're just getting started, yeah, it totally makes sense to borrow and rent and leverage other people's platforms and audiences to get off the ground. But once you're off the ground, I think it totally makes sense to build your own assets. And I think that like assets in a traditional sense was email list and blog post. And honestly, we are seeing a lot of, I would say, like kind of old school marketers running around saying like, told you so, like you should have been building your list, right? Because ultimately my list like does so well. And, you know, in these times of uncertainty, like I'm just inking money off of my list. And to a certain degree, what we're talking about when we're thinking about influencer marketing is sort of like a list or an audience that people are going to care about. We do have a couple of questions, so I'm going to backtrack to some of the previous discussions that we were having. Ben asks, do we have any evidence that Google is penalizing sites that post inauthentic content, or conversely rewarding more authentic sites with higher domain authority? I would say that just off the top of my head, the Medic update where expertise, authority, and trustworthiness were cited as the main cause of the demise of lots of websites like Dr. Axe, and Wellness Mama and lots of like kind of your supplement, natural wellness space just got destroyed. And that's where we saw this rise of like, oh, this was medically reviewed by X or blah. And so generally, I think you should take those events and abstract away what they mean for the future of Google's algorithm, right? Google for the longest time has been saying, we want to help users find relevant information as quickly as possible. So, there's a couple of different things at play there, relevant being a very important piece, and like, helping users being another relevant piece. So you could imagine, right, if Google is going to continue delivering upon this, that it just means that when a user lands on a page that doesn't feel relevant or doesn't feel authentic or trustworthy, they're very likely to go back to Google and click on another result. If that's the case, you might as well start bulletproofing or enhancing the trustworthiness of all kinds of content now, regardless of whether it's in the health and wellness space. It totally applies to personal finance, right? Like this CFA reviewed this piece of content, or right, like recipes. It's like, oh, this nutritionist created this, something like that, right? It's just applicable everywhere. But do y'all have any, I guess, evidence that Google is penalizing sites with inauthentic content that you've seen?
I think some of the same examples that you shared for sure. I mean, there's just on message boards, forums, search engine land, some of those sites that kind of discuss it. But I think I call this the sliding scale of EAT. So the your money or your life type of queries and you brought out two of those big ones, personal finance and medicine, that the standards are going to be way higher, much higher. So if you're going to be penalized stronger if you're in an area that requires a higher level of expertise, authoritativeness, and trust. So I kind of use the joke about this, like if the stakes are a lot lower, then like you don't need to have this like amazing trustworthy experts person to on your site for certain pieces of content. Like I was thinking about a restaurant site or a review that's reviewing like restaurant tools, and like if you had like a garlic press or something, you don't need like Guy Fieri or Wolfgang Puck to like say this is the best garlic press. It's like, hey, I tested a bunch of these. This is the one I liked. Like the stakes are low. It's like, oh no, I bought a crummy $8 like piece of kitchenware. Oh well, find something else. But I think that like that creating that types of content and moving your way up the ladder, if you will, of like then you kind of become that expert in itself. So that's something I maybe would think about. I don't, to the point directly, I don't have any other really examples, but just kind of something to think about there is don't overthink it all the time with what we've been saying around, like, be more authentic. The authentic will show that you become the expert, that you become trustworthy. But as the stakes are higher and it's more specific to like influencing people's lives in a certain way, in a bigger manner, you need to be aware of what you're putting out there for content, because you could get penalized for it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, right, like the stakes thing that you mentioned, Stephen, is perfect, right? Like if you look at what's ranking for best garlic press, or even a lot of these best, like whatever, it's exactly the state that I've described, where it's a stock photo and it's literally like pros, cons, and it's like, okay, if you read Upwork descriptions of what internet marketers are literally saying, like their standard operating procedure, they're like, okay, read the reviews on Amazon, filter it by 1 star, come up with 6 cons, read the 5-star ones, come up with like, six pros, and, like write a 5,000 word piece of content that's Clearscope A++, and that's your assignment, right? It's like the people are not actually using each one of the products, and a very low stakes way of getting authenticity is to say, oh, and by the way, here's like $200, buy each of the products and like take a picture with the product, right? Like that's as like low stakes as we're talking about for a lot of different segments of industry. Of course, as Stephen was mentioning, your money, your life is going to be way more like high stakes, right? You can't just take a photo of your garlic press or, you know, your Visa credit card and be like, yeah, this one's the best. That's not how that works. So I think that's an interesting thing there. And then we're just going to get straight into Q&A at this point in the last like 10 minutes. But here's an interesting one. Enrique asks, I've noticed a tilt towards community-driven marketing on sites like Reddit, Quora. As a brand, how much can we influence these sources without being dinged for astroturfing? And I'm just going to add a follow-up to that as well. It's like, okay, extended beyond Reddit and Quora, we have public and private Facebook groups, public and private Slack channels, and all of these little mini forums where, you know, they're kind of trying to keep out the cruft and the shillers and promoters, and therefore have, you know, thriving communities around actual substances of discussions. I think this is an interesting question to you, Amanda. How does one sort of get the community buy-in without seeming like you're just coming in trying to make a quick buck from everybody who's engaged in those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, I see this a lot in a lot of the private Slack communities that I'm in, where you have the obvious shillers that, and I think like in a community, that sort of behavior kind of naturally gets penalized in the sense of people won't engage with it. They'll just ignore you. So there's that, like you'll just get ignored if you seem like you are very overtly selling your product. The other side I would say is, I think it's becoming more and more important for people to think about individual influencers or people building their personal brands. Like, you know, if you were to start, if you were to go on Reddit, like as Yelp, or like as a, like, oh, Yelp was replying to this, that might look weird, right? But it's different if you as an individual are coming in saying like, hey, I work at Yelp, and you know, what we see on the B2B side is this thing, or, you know, where you are being transparent about who you are, maybe what your interests are or what your vested interests are, but answering in an honest and authentic way. I don't know about astroturfing specifically, if like how any kinds of like algorithms work here, because my approach is just very personal to a lot of these things, and just being very upfront about like, oh, I work at this company, or like, here's my point of view on this, or hey, as a marketer, here's what I think, versus just trying to be like, oh, here is the truth, and like, listen to me.
Yeah, I've I guess a funny anecdote for you, Enrique, is that back in the day, Quora was a lot more lax about their policies, and you could actually say the same about Reddit in terms of kind of gaming the system. So I hired some people to scrape Quora, basically figure out all of the different questions that people are asking around the subject matter that I cared about, filter it by views and like comments on those. And then I had basically a prioritized list of questions with the most views and activity associated with it. For each one, then I basically went out and hired somebody to just write kind of a thoughtful-ish response. But at the end of the day, it was just promoting strictly my product and service at the time. And then you could buy upvotes. Buying upvotes on Quora actually gave you credits at the time. And with the credits, you could actually use those to promote your answers to those questions. So Quora's algorithm was a combination of how many times your answer got viewed and how many upvotes that you got. And so it was actually a self perpetuating solution, because I'd get more upvotes, which would get me more credits, which would then allow me to promote my answers. And then I just got like a crap ton of very relevant traffic to my site. Obviously, you know, that's hacking the system, if you will. Wouldn't necessarily recommend that. I think people are a lot more cautious about growth hacking in general, because information travels at the speed of the internet, right? If somebody catches on that you're doing something slightly shady, like everybody's going to know and you'll be outed fairly quickly. So yeah, I mean, that was just what came to my mind when you asked that. Okay, we have a question from Dominic. He says, we have been publishing authentic and high quality content. As a consequence, other sites copying our content are copying our content and changing the text slightly. Do you think Google will eventually penalize this process or practice? What can we do against it? Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't have a good answer for you there. I would say that it seems like probably just a very tough problem to begin with. Yeah, I'm not sure. Do any of y'all have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, you can document it. I'll put in the chat box. You can hear like for spammy content, you might want to try this approach where you could put in a request, to document to Google that this is happening, but it needs to be clear that it's very plagiaristic. So just make sure it's documented. You might even try to run like a test, if you will, a test to see like where you exactly when you publish a piece of content, when it's been cached in the index, change some of the content, find out when this other site is changing, how fast they're changing the content relative, and then you can maybe kind of use that as an example to quote unquote catch them that that's what they're doing. So
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. We at one of the past.
I will say too that I have lived through where we did find someone in our at a prior position. A colleague found that a link building scheme was happening, and so it was documented and submitted, and we saw some results. So it is possible to get someone else in trouble. Just be ready to document it clearly.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm sure Yelp does some form of this as well to prevent people from scraping their content. But in, I guess, a like data scraping world, what this is like sort of known as is a honeypot. So you can imagine, say I'm starting a competitive service to Yelp, and I go and I scrape all of the businesses off of Yelp, then what conceivably Yelp has in place to protect against this is fake listings that are unique to Yelp. So if I end up taking exactly what Yelp has and not cross-checking it against the Yellow Pages or Foursquare or Swarm databases to actually ensure that these are unique or actually like correct businesses, I might end up posting a business, we'll call it like Amanda's Kitchen, that actually doesn't really exist. And if I post that, then Yelp basically knows that I scraped their data because that is unique to Yelp's data set only. So that would be a way, especially if you have this like developers thing, where you can like just make a kind of a weird sort of claim within your content that's unique to like, you could make up a product or a name or something like that. And if that just showed up basically in competitive content, then you'd be like, yeah.
Well, like another way that you can do it is just more from a tech SEO point of view. If it's happening at a large scale, is update your robots text file to disallow bots to crawl except for the core ones that you want, in Bing bot, Google, etc. The other thing too is setting up I know that Amazon has a web application firewall for bots. So you can review your log files, look at which bots may be pinging your site a lot, and then identifying that one and blocking that one specifically, or setting it up so that you basically block almost everything and then allow only certain bots to crawl. So that would be another approach from like a tech SEO point of view if it's happening at a large scale and a lot of pieces of content. I'm not sure for this example if it's product based or just kind of I don't know how proprietary it is that what's being taken from you. So that's just another approach that I would look at is review your log files and see if there's something happening there. There's a malicious bot that's crawling and scraping.
All right, we got time for one more question, and it is from Irene. What do you think of the future of company blogs? Is it going away in favor of more distributed content hubs and resource libraries, social community, or do we think it's always going to be an important piece of the content ecosystem? thoughts?
Briefly, I'll just say important. We're keeping it. And kind of what we're saying is like you may grow your audience elsewhere, but you do want to have some control over the messaging, or at least just being able to present it in the manner that you want. So I know that it's an important part of our strategy. And I think it is for lots of sites. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also could be a blog, but it may just be called something else, but it's really a blog still, you know, like you might be call it resources, but it's really a blog. So
yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Stephen. Like, I think it's, to me, it's kind of an issue of semantics, right? Like you can call it a blog, you can call it a resource center, you can call it a content hub. But what I see it as your own space where the content you are producing is free and publicly available. So it could be a blog. It doesn't have to be a blog.
Yeah, it could be under the resources subfolder learn. I think the differentiation to me is it's a bit more of like evergreen content, or at least like blog is more timely. It's got the byline, the dateline and stuff. But you know, even now, like I've seen many of sites like update a blog post because it gains a lot of traction, that page becomes authoritative, and then you want to reuse that URL, and so you might update it for the following year, or you're like make changes to it and then republish it to the front or homepage of your blog, and still keep the value of that URL from an SEO perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is totally semantics. However, if we're going to call it a blog, then I prefer for that content to be more, we'll call it like lights are on content or company updates, right? Because a blog, in my opinion, like what you both have been echoing, it implies timely, right? So like a blog means that something happened on a date. And you know, if Clearscope IPOs, we put it on our blog. If Clearscope brings in a new team member, we put it on our blog. But if Clearscope posts a piece of content on the importance of backlinks as it relates to SEO, we'll put it in our resource center because it's not something that is like, okay, you know, this happened at this time. It's more of like a resource and our thoughts about a specific, you know, philosophy or something like that. So that's how I would divvy it up in my mind. It's like if it's a blog, I think it should be specifically kind of time events that prove to people that the lights are on in your company. And then other things should probably be shoved into your resource hub and that kind of stuff. Okay, well, we're a few minutes over, but just wanted to say thank you so much for everybody tuning in, for our guest speakers, Amanda and Stephen. They were truly wonderful. And yeah, I'll post their Twitters to the follow-up email that I'll be sending out tomorrow, which will include the recording to this guest discussion. Any concluding thoughts from either of y'all?
No.
Be patient, stay at it. Like sometimes results take a while. I know that we didn't talk about a lot of those kind of the results portion, but you know, just hang in there and you're just hang in there and you'll see the results come as you continue to publish good content, distribute it correctly, properly. You'll get there.
Yeah, I'll add rent and own. Rent your social media audience and then own your audience on your blog or your email list or somewhere. Rent and own.
I love it. Yeah. And on my end, it's like SEO content is simply one specific channel. It's rapidly evolving, and one could even argue that you're renting Google's audience as a result of said thing. So depending on obviously your business model and your goals, definitely look to diversify a bit into other channels that could make sense, and definitely owning your own audiences is truly relevant. Of course, being patient should you get penalized by an algorithm update, or if you're just getting started, is just par course for how to play the SEO game. All righty, thank you so much, and I'll follow up with the both of you shortly.
Yeah,
Thanks
you everyone. Thanks,
Later.
Bernard.